I held the warm dish of peach cobbler in both hands as I pushed open the wooden gate to my son's backyard. My name is Evelyn Parker, 72 years old, and I have baked that same cobbler for nearly half my life. It used to mean something when I brought it to family gatherings. That afternoon, though, before I even set foot inside, I heard Melissa's voice, sharp, amused, careless. Why is she even still alive? The laughter that followed wasn't loud, but it cut through me deeper than any shout could. I stood frozen for a breath, the steam rising faintly from the crust in my hands. My first instinct was to turn around to leave the cobbler on the fence post and walk back home. But something inside me refused. I straightened my back and kept walking as if those words had never reached me. My shoes crunched against the gravel path while conversations carried on without pause. Not one face turned when I entered. The backyard was strung with lights music too loud for anyone past 40, pulsed from a speaker, and tables overflowed with food I hadn't been asked to bring. Some of the people were strangers. Some were my own blood, yet none of them smiled at me. My son Daniel raised his beer and toasted to family, but his eyes never met mine. Even the children, my grandchildren, ran past me without a single, "Hi, Grandma." I wondered if they even recognized me without the apron, without the grocery bags I used to carry through their door. Melissa finally approached, lips curved in that tight smile she saves for photographs. "Did you want a plate?" she asked, like I was a distant neighbor instead of Daniel's mother. I said I was fine. She nodded too quickly already, halfway turned away. I set the cobbler at the far end of the table and sat down alone, my chair creaking beneath me. I wasn't angry yet. I wasn't even sad. I was simply aware of how invisible I had become in a life I had once built with my own hands. And in that moment, as I looked at the faces that refused to see me, a decision began to form. I sat at the far end of the folding table, the cobbler cooling in front of me untouched. The chair creaked beneath my weight, reminding me that even the furniture had aged alongside me. No one offered me a plate or a glass. The air smelled of grilled meat and citronella candles, the kind of backyard comfort that should have felt like home, but I was only a shadow on the edges. Daniel laughed with his friends, retelling some story from work, and Melissa hovered beside him, pouring drinks and tossing glances at the crowd, like a hostess, making sure the scene looked polished. Not once did either of them look down the table toward me. A stranger at a party might have been treated with more warmth than what I received as their mother. I watched my grandchildren dart between chairs, their sneakers pounding the grass. Once, twice, 3 times, they ran past me each time without a glance. I remembered how I used to keep gummy bears in little Ziploc bags for them, how their small hands would reach eagerly into my pockets. Now they didn't even slow down. I wondered if they recognized me at all or if I had become just another older woman blending into the background. When Daniel finally stood beer in hand and raised a toast to family, every voice around the table echoed. Glasses clinked and laughter spread. None of it reached me. My hands stayed folded on my lap. I wanted to believe he meant those words, but the way his eyes skipped over me told me otherwise. I stayed quiet, watching the plates empty and the sky darken, and I knew something had shifted. I was not part of their family circle anymore. I was tolerated, not cherished, and that realization pressed heavier than any silence could. Back home that night, I couldn't shake the way Daniel's eyes had slid past me, like I was a stranger. The cobbler dish, now empty, sat on my counter, as though it had never left my kitchen. I cleaned it slowly, running the sponge in circles, and my mind drifted back to the day I first handed him $40,000, the down payment, for the house he now lived in with Melissa. I remembered the look on his face then, a mixture of relief and gratitude, and the words I had written on the note tucked into the folder. "Because you're my son." That single line had felt so natural at the time, as though love needed no explanation. But standing in my kitchen decades later, the memory stung like salt in a wound. I had worked 30 years at the library, clipping coupons, skipping vacations, putting away every extra dollar. That money had been meant for my retirement for a little peace when my body grew tired. Instead, I handed it over freely, believing it would weave me into the fabric of his new family. I thought it would guarantee me a place at the table. But there was no seat saved for me. As I dried the dish and slid it back into the cupboard, I realized how much of myself I had poured into their lives, babysitting on short notice, bringing casseroles when Melissa was sick, staying late to fold their laundry after birthday parties. None of it seemed to matter now. To them, I was not the woman who sacrificed. I was just someone they had learned to overlook. The silence in my house that evening felt different. It wasn't just quiet, it was a verdict. The next morning, I dressed carefully, pulling on a pressed blouse and slacks I hadn't worn in years. Something inside me whispered that if I was about to change the course of my life, I ought to look the part. I carried a worn manila folder under my arm filled with deeds receipts and the yellowed letter I had once written Daniel. My destination was Marjorie Lee's home, a friend from long ago, who had spent her career in probate law. We had met at a church fundraiser more than 20 years earlier, and though our paths rarely crossed, since I remembered her sharp mind and steady presence. When she opened the door that day, her house smelled faintly of lemon polish and peppermint tea. She ushered me to her dining table where stacks of neatly organized papers hinted at the discipline that had defined her working life. I slid the folder toward her, my fingers lingering on the edge, as if letting go of it meant letting go of something far greater. She flipped through quickly, pausing only to read the note in my handwriting. "Because you're my son." Her eyes softened, but her voice remained practical. "You gave it as a gift, Evelyn. Legally, it's theirs." My chest tightened, but before despair could set in, she leaned forward. "That doesn't mean you're powerless. You can't take back what's already theirs, but you can decide what happens with everything else: your will, your accounts, your authority." Her words steadied me. For the first time in years, I felt a sliver of control returning. She gave me a short list of steps to begin with: revoking Daniel's power of attorney, revising my estate, securing my accounts. As I folded the list and slipped it into my purse, I realized this wasn't revenge, it was survival. 2 days later, I called a locksmith. The young man who arrived was polite, almost too polite, as if he sensed this job carried a weight beyond the simple metal tumblers he replaced. When he handed me the new set of keys, I felt something uncoil inside my chest. 4 copies, one for me, one in the fireproof box, one for the bank safe, and one for my neighbor Janet across the street. For the first time in years, I slept without leaving the hallway light on. The following morning, I walked into First Community Bank and asked to see a manager. I sat across from a woman named Teresa, who pulled up my accounts with practiced efficiency. "You have one co-signer listed," she said, pausing at the name. "Daniel." I cleared my throat. "Remove him. Cancel his card. Issue everything under my name alone." Teresa studied me for a moment as though deciding whether to challenge my resolve, but then she nodded and began typing. Watching her fingers move across the keyboard, I felt a strange sense of cleansing, like watching dust swept out the front door. That evening, instead of baking for a family that no longer welcomed me, I made a pie just for myself. Blueberry with lemon zest, the recipe I used to save for holidays. I cut a slice and carried the rest next door to Janet, who had lived alone since her husband's passing. She looked surprised when I knocked, but she welcomed me in without hesitation. We ate together at her small kitchen table, laughing over the tartness of the berries. She never asked about Daniel. She didn't need to. For the first time in a long while, I shared food without sharing my silence. That Sunday evening, the phone blinked with a new voicemail. I stood in the kitchen, arms crossed, listening as Daniel's voice filled the room. Mom Melissa didn't mean anything by what she said last weekend. She was tired, that's all. "Don't take it so personally. You know how family gatherings can be." His tone was casual, rehearsed, the same rhythm he'd used since he was a teenager caught sneaking in past curfew. I played it twice, the words rolling over me like water over stone. He wasn't apologizing. He was explaining me away, filing my pain under the label of misunderstanding. I deleted the message without saving it. My thumb hovered over the button for a moment, but when the recording vanished, I felt lighter. For years, I had archived his excuses as if they were worth keeping, tucking them into mental drawers padded with phrases like he didn't mean it or she's just under stress. That night, I decided my home would no longer serve as a museum of their justifications. The house was still the kind of quiet that once drove me restless, yet now it pulsed with something different. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, letting the silence spread through the walls. It didn't feel empty. It felt decisive. When Janet stopped by later with a container of soup, we shared another laugh over nothing important, and I realized how healing it could be to let conversations wander without circling back to wounds. I didn't need Daniel's explanations anymore. I didn't even need his voice on my answering machine. Sometimes silence speaks louder than any reply, and mine had finally found its volume. It was late on a gray Wednesday when the phone rang again. I almost let it go to voicemail, expecting another empty explanation, but the voice that came through was smaller, unsteady. "Grandma, it's Chloe. Is this still your number?" I pressed the receiver closer, my heart pausing mid-beat. "It is," I answered, my voice softer than I intended. She hesitated. "I found it in Dad's old phone. He doesn't know I'm calling." The quiet stretched until she finally whispered, "I'm sorry for not talking to you, for pretending not to see you at the library that day, for laughing when Mom said what she said. It wasn't funny. You just wanted to belong." I finished gently. There was a fragile silence then, a breath on the other end. Yes, I didn't rush to absolve her. The instinct to smooth things over had lived in me for too long, and I'd evicted it recently. But I did say, "Thank you for calling. Can I see you?" Just me. Not Dad. Not Mom. I looked at the drawer I had emptied weeks ago, the one once filled with stickers and trinkets I had saved for the children. For years, I had held on to the hope they would come running through my door again. That hope had soured into ache, yet hearing Chloe's voice, now trembling but honest, was something different. "All right," I said after a moment. "Come by tomorrow after school. Just you." The relief in her sigh reached me through the line. "I will. I promise." When I hung up, the tea beside me had gone cold, but something inside me had warmed again. Not hope exactly, but the possibility of truth. The knock came sharp at 10 in the morning. I knew before opening the door who it was. Melissa never knocked softly. Her presence always demanded an audience. When I pulled the door open, she stepped inside without weighting her heels, clicking against the hardwood as if she owned every inch of the house. "This is getting out of hand," she announced, clutching her purse like it was a shield. "You've blocked Daniel's calls. You've changed your accounts. And now Chloe is sneaking around to see you. Do you realize the drama you're causing?" I stood in the middle of my living room, steady. "Every word you just said is true." She blinked, thrown by the calmness in my reply. "We're your family. You can't just erase us because of one bad day." One bad day, I let the words settle between us. That afternoon in your backyard wasn't the start of anything. It was the final straw. Years of being seated behind centerpieces, of being told not to bring food because it wasn't modern, of watching my son toast a family without looking at me. That didn't happen in one day. It happened in all of them. Her mouth tightened. "Daniel's a good man. He doesn't deserve this punishment. Good men don't laugh when their wives wonder why their mother is still alive." I said, my voice firm but quiet. She shifted, searching for ground. "You're exaggerating. You've always been difficult." I almost smiled. "That's what people call women, who finally stop handing over their silence." Her eyes darted to the packed boxes stacked near the door. She realized then that I wasn't bluffing. "So you're really leaving?" "I am." For the first time in years, the final word was mine. The classified section of the Sunday paper lay folded on my kitchen table. I circled an ad for a one-bedroom apartment on the edge of town. Ground floor washer and dryer, included quiet neighborhood. Nothing glamorous, nothing large, just enough. On Tuesday, I drove over. The complex was made of red brick buildings with tidy flower beds out front, the kind of place people kept simple but cared for. The manager, a kind woman named Teresa, walked me through Unit 1B. Sunlight poured through the south-facing windows, catching the laminate counters in the kitchen. The space was small but honest. No echoes of arguments, no walls heavy with old laughter that had turned brittle. Just light and room enough for me. "I'll take it," I said without hesitation. Teresa blinked, surprised. "Don't you want to think about it? I already have." By the afternoon, the deposit was signed my name, written clearly on the lease. Walking back to my car, I felt taller than I had in years. That night, I opened the closet and pulled down boxes that had sat untouched for decades. Holiday tablecloths, school projects, quilts, half finished. I began sorting keep, donate, discard. Each decision felt like peeling off another layer of skin I no longer needed. In the guest room, I found a dresser Daniel and Melissa had once rejected as too dated. My hands lingered on its worn handles. Then I scribbled donate on a piece of tape. The act wasn't bitter, it was freeing. For years, I had waited for someone else to decide my worth. Now each object I touched carried a different question. Do I need this for the life ahead, or was it meant only for the life I'm leaving behind? Chloe showed up the next afternoon carrying her school bag and something folded under her arm. She looked nervous, standing on my porch, shifting from one sneaker to the other. When I opened the door, she held out the bundle of paper like an offering. "I made this last night," she said. "It's not very good, but—" I unfolded it carefully. Pencil lines spread across the page, rough but certain. It was a drawing of a woman seated at a table, her back straight, her gaze forward. In front of her was a chessboard. On her side were only 2 pieces. On the other, a full set. Yet the 2 pieces were positioned to win. My throat tightened. "She's not finished," Chloe added quickly. "She's just starting to play her game." I set the drawing down on the table and looked at her. She had Daniel's eyes from when he was 8, before the world taught him how to sidestep responsibility. "Can I hang it in the new apartment?" I asked. Her whole face lit up. "Really? You'd want to?" "Of course," I said, and for the first time in a long while, the word want belonged to me. We sat at the table sharing banana bread I had baked that morning. Chloe talked about school, about the book she was reading about a cat she wanted but wasn't allowed to have. I listened not as a grandmother begging for scraps of attention, but as a woman choosing who belonged in her circle. When she left, she hugged me tighter than I expected. "I don't want to lose this again," she whispered. "You won't," I told her. "Not as long as you come with honesty." The chessboard in her drawing reminded me I still had moves left. Moving day arrived quietly without balloons or goodbyes. 2 young movers carried the labeled boxes out of the house I had lived in for more than 40 years. They worked quickly, surprised by how little I chose to keep. Most of my life had already been sorted, keep, donate, discard, long before their truck pulled up. I walked through each room one last time, my fingertips brushing the walls. In Daniel's old bedroom, the curtains with little sailboats still hung in the window, faded but intact. In the hallway, the spot where I once marked his height year after year was painted over, yet I could still feel the faint indentations when I pressed my hand against the wall. I didn't cry. Instead, I carried a small envelope to the empty hallway table and placed it inside the top drawer. It held 1 key and a note written in my neatest script. "This house taught me everything. Thank you." When I locked the front door for the final time, I didn't look back. The new apartment smelled faintly of fresh paint and lemon cleaner. Teresa greeted me with a smile and handed over a tiny succulent in a ceramic pot shaped like a cat. "Something green for your window," she said. I set it beside the sink and whispered, "I think we'll get along." The first thing I unpacked was the kettle. The second was Chloe's drawing. I hung it near the window where the afternoon sun caught the pencil strokes, turning them almost silver. That night, I ate a simple dinner of toast and tea on the small balcony wrapped in a blanket. The street below was quiet, the world continuing on, but for the first time in years, I felt no urge to chase it. I had arrived. On the morning of my 73rd birthday, I woke without an alarm. No balloons waited on the porch, no phone calls from relatives who remembered me once a year, just the soft patter of rain against the window and the smell of coffee drifting from my small kitchen. I made 2 pancakes, drizzled them with honey, and sat at my table with a sliced pear on the side. It wasn't a feast, but it was mine. Later, Chloe arrived carrying a bundle of tulips still wrapped in the paper sleeve from the florist. "You're not really a birthday cake person," she said shyly, "so I brought flowers like grown-ups do." She handed me a handmade card painted in careful strokes. On the front were 2 chairs on a porch, one empty one with a teacup resting on the armrest. Inside, in her uneven handwriting, it read, "Thank you for keeping a seat for me." I pressed the card to my chest. We made tea, shared toast, and talked about her exams, her part-time job plans, and the support group she hoped to start at school for kids who didn't feel at home in their own homes. When she asked if she could use my name in her project, I told her, "Only if it's for something true." She laughed. "That's the only way I use it now." That evening, I hosted 3 women from the building neighbors who had become friends over shared crossword puzzles and evening tea. We sat around my small table trading stories about aching knees, grocery prices, and the kindness of strangers. No one mentioned Daniel or Melissa. No one needed to. When the laughter faded into a comfortable silence, I thought back to the words I had overheard that afternoon in the backyard. Why is she even still alive? Now I knew the answer. I was alive to remember my own name, to set my own table, to leave the door open only for those who knock with clean hands. The cobbler dish sat clean on my shelf, waiting not for them, but for the life I had finally chosen. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy these family drama and revenge stories, please subscribe and join me for more every day.